But the thing about habits is they're so damn fast, right? They just happen before you know it, and all of a sudden you're carried along by that historical tendency. Now, this can be both good and bad. If we had to actively think through everything we ever do, we would be in a bit of a pickle. It's a good thing that I don't have to think through how to eat an apple. I have a habit established for that particular behavior. It's also a good thing that I don't have to think through how to talk to my girlfriend whenever I see her. I've got a habit. It's an established behavior. But the challenge is when we want to shift a habit. I would encourage you not to go into the language of breaking a habit. Breaking anything about your psychological structure is a little dicey. But if, I should say, you want a deep dive into this, I would recommend you check out the Movement as Metaphor course. I've put a link in the description for this video, there, or wherever. But the thing is, when you want to change a habit, having an understanding of the neurological processes in place is actually pretty helpful, because there are essentially two things that have to happen if you'd like to change a habit. Now, it's worth keeping in mind, again, a habit is a behavior you've engaged in often enough that the neurological foundations for that behavior are more well established. You have a tighter coupling of synaptic connections, they're better myelinated. Basically, those behaviors, they slip through the neural network more quickly than other behaviors would. That's part of what makes a habit, neurologically speaking. So two things have to happen if you wish to change a habit. First is you must develop awareness of what's happening. Like, you can't change a thing if you don't know what it is. You've got to be aware of the fact that you're picking your nails, or that you are hitting snooze every single day, or that you are drinking 2 drinks instead of 1 drink, or whatever the case is. Pick a habit. You have to know what's taking place in order for a change to occur. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you must inhibit whatever you've been doing if you want to then allow a change to take place. And this is where a lot of people will trip themselves up, because we've been sold all sorts of garbage about how easy and effortless and all the time habits will always be if we want to change them. It's just not the case. Neurologically speaking, it will take you more energy to inhibit a thing, to stop the habit, than it will to go along with the habit. Again, the good and bad of habits is that they are quick, they are energetically efficient, we don't have to think about them. However, if we want to dismantle some of the structures that support that habit, then we have to go about A, noticing the thing, and B, inhibiting the thing. Now, typically it's agreed that that inhibitory ability, that ability to stop a neurological impulse, it is primarily located within the prefrontal cortex, which evolutionarily speaking is the more recent of the various brain structures. It's a little newer on the scene, it's not as well field tested, and it's a little clunkier. It lets us do all sorts of fun stuff, but it's not as efficient as some of the older, evolutionarily speaking, parts of the brain. So what happens is, in the span of maybe a couple hundred microseconds, you have an impulse for a habit, and then if you catch it, if you're aware of it early enough, and this does take some practice, you can notice the thing and say, I'm going to stop doing that. Now, the inhibition of that step is going to feel like a bit of work. It's going to create a bit of confusion, because essentially what you've done is you've taken a familiar frame, a pretty normal gestalt for you, and you've dismantled that. You've stopped it from going on. So there's going to be a moment of confusion. Let's say, for example, I'll use myself here, if I want to stop a habit of anxiously picking at my nails, I have to know that I do that. It's helpful to know when and where I do that. And then as soon as I notice myself starting, I can stop. And there's an awkward moment when I stop a habit where I think, shit, what happens now? What was I doing? And you break your brain a little bit when you do that. Or at least it feels that way. Because, again, that familiar gestalt has all of a sudden come apart. But this is actually the genesis of creative action, of creative thinking as well. Most people seem to get this wrong. They think that creativity, that generative action, that making a new thing is always pretty and easy and comfortable, and they forget, I mean, it's baked into nearly every wisdom tradition, that destruction and creation go hand in hand. So we don't necessarily need to go in with the intention of breaking our habits, but we can know that in the process of creating new behavioral subroutines, what we might think of as habits, the old ones are going to be dismantled, just as a matter of course. So when I interrupt myself in the midst of a habit, when I inhibit that neurological impulse, there's an awkward moment of, now what? And I would encourage you not to be compulsive and mechanistic with yourself in those moments. The habits are already compulsive and mechanistic enough. Replacing one form of tyranny with another form of tyranny is not so good. Replacing one compulsion with another compulsion, not so good. Replacing one mechanism with another mechanism, not so good. What you can do once you have brought awareness to what is taking place and how it's occurring, and when you have inhibited that tendency, is you can wait. And I promise you, that gestalt will resolve itself. You will come up with something different to do. It'll be uncomfortable and unfamiliar. It won't feel as easy and as slipstream as your normal habits would. But from that place of inhibition of our habitual tendencies, that moment where we choose not to let our life history perpetuate itself moving forward, in that moment we have an opportunity for creative action to take place. That's the moment where we have access to something new. Now, I'll tell you a little story about where this can get particularly complicated. And I actually don't know how the story ends. It came up very recently. But I just had a call with a woman who had this tendency of stopping herself. We did a little bit of unpacking of her metaphorical situation, and she was very well acquainted with the idea of stopping herself. Now, this is an interesting habit. There's an impulse that's coming up through you, and you stop it to the point where it becomes a habit and you've lost control of your ability to stop that thing. It's a scary situation, yeah? So, what do? What we need to do in that case is notice how and when we stop ourselves. So her homework is to notice, when do you stop yourself? And when you stop yourself or hold yourself back, what's actually taking place? And if you can begin to notice that over a couple of days, over a couple of weeks, can you then practice stopping the stopping? Now, I know that sounds a little bit circular. The unfortunate truth is that lineal logic doesn't always apply in terms of embodied phenomena, in terms of our psychological processing. Expecting logical cause and effect, it can go out the window when it comes to the body and the psyche. But if you can stop the stopping, and if you can handle that bit of recursive circular thinking, you will have access to a whole repertoire of behaviors that you were totally unaware of before. The things that had been so dampened down by the compulsive stopping and checking yourself and holding yourself back. If you can notice where and how you stop yourself and inhibit those tendencies to stop yourself, that is a creative wellspring just waiting for you. So as I mentioned, I don't know how that story ends. She's going to write back in a couple of days or maybe a couple of weeks. We'll get a sense of closure on that story. But for the time being, if there is a habit you would like to shift, remember, the part of you in control of shifting that is a little slower and a little more energetically expensive than the part of you that is currently governing and driving that habit forward. So what you want to do is A, bring awareness to what habit you want to change and how it takes place. You don't need to go digging around for why. Why do I do this? Why am I such a mess up? Doesn't matter. Not helpful. Don't go looking for little insights. I promise it's a wild goose chase. But you notice what's happening. You notice how it's taking place. And then you do your best consistently to inhibit the habit and simply wait. Wait with the tension of stopping. And if you can be just still with that tension, if you can allow yourself to sit with that tension, it will resolve itself. When we sit with that tension or that boredom or that anxiety and we don't cover it up or brush it under the rug or anything like that, we can't help but come up with creative ideation, new ways of acting, new ways of thinking, new ways of feeling about the things that we do. So again, awareness and inhibition, and in that process, the neurological substrate of your habit, it begins to dismantle itself, and those new behaviors can begin to reinforce themselves as well. So again, this is all well and good as an idea. If you would like an actual concrete practice of this, I cannot recommend the Movement as Metaphor course enough. People love it. It's a freaking bargain. I think it's like 30 videos, 12 different practices, probably 3 or 4 hours of bonus content too. It's a little bit of a mind-blowing thing. So I put the link somewhere here. Check it out. If you have any questions, let me know. There's another call coming up shortly. But anyway, take care. Hope you find this useful. We'll talk soon.